You've been taught that openness is a virtue, that vulnerability builds trust, that sharing yourself freely is the mark of emotional health and authentic connection. But Carl Jung spent decades studying the psychology of self-disclosure and discovered something that contradicts nearly everything modern culture tells you about being open. He found that certain kinds of information, once revealed, fundamentally alter how people perceive you and interact with you. Not because people are bad, but because the human psyche responds to specific categories of personal information in predictable and often destructive ways that the person sharing has no control over. Jung observed this pattern across hundreds of patients. People who shared freely ended up manipulated, undermined, or sabotaged, often by the very individuals they trusted most. And the damage wasn't caused by malice. It was caused by unconscious psychological mechanisms that activate automatically when certain information enters someone's awareness. Jung realized that strategic silence wasn't dishonesty or emotional avoidance. It was psychological intelligence. Knowing what to protect wasn't about hiding who you are. It was about understanding how the human shadow responds to vulnerability and refusing to hand people weapons they don't even know they'll use against you. Today I'm going to reveal the 7 specific categories of information Jung identified that you should guard carefully, why each one triggers predictable psychological responses in others, and how protecting these parts of yourself isn't about being closed off, but about being wise enough to understand what happens inside people's minds when you give them access to the wrong things. The first thing you should never reveal to anyone is your next move. Jung observed that when people share their plans, goals, or ambitions before those things are accomplished, something shifts in the dynamic between them and whoever they have told. The person receiving this information rarely stays neutral. Their unconscious immediately begins calculating how your success would affect them, where it would place them relative to you, whether your rise threatens their position. Jung found this wasn't limited to envious or toxic people. Even loving family members and close friends experienced unconscious threat responses when someone announced plans that would elevate them. A mother who genuinely wants her daughter to succeed might unconsciously sabotage through doubt disguised as concern. A friend who truly cares about you might subtly discourage through realistic advice that's actually their shadow protecting itself from your advancement. These responses aren't conscious. The people doing them would be horrified to realize what they're actually doing. But Jung documented them consistently across all kinds of relationships. There's another dimension to this that Jung found equally important. When you announce a plan, your psyche experiences a premature sense of completion. The act of telling someone about your goal gives you a psychological reward that mimics the reward of actually achieving it. Your unconscious registers the social acknowledgement as partial accomplishment, which reduces the internal drive needed to follow through. Jung noticed that his most successful patients were often the most secretive about their ambitions. They let results announce themselves. They understood that silence protected both their motivation and their plans from the unconscious interference of others. The second thing you should never reveal is your deepest insecurity. This might sound like it contradicts everything you've heard about vulnerability and authentic connection, but Jung drew a sharp distinction between healthy vulnerability and psychological exposure. Healthy vulnerability is sharing feelings with someone who has earned trust through consistent behavior over time. Psychological exposure is handing someone the blueprint to your deepest wound before they've demonstrated they'll protect it. Jung studied how people unconsciously store information about others' insecurities and then deploy that information during conflict. A partner who knows your deepest fear of abandonment will, during an argument, threaten to leave. Not because they're necessarily a narcissist, because in moments of emotional activation, the shadow reaches for whatever weapon is available. And the more precisely someone knows where you're vulnerable, the more precisely they can wound you when their shadow takes over. Jung called this the weaponization of intimacy. The very information that was supposed to create closeness becomes ammunition during disconnection. He observed couples who had shared their deepest wounds with each other, and then watched in horror as those exact wounds were targeted during fights. The husband who confessed his father called him worthless, hearing his wife say he'd never amount to anything during a heated moment. The wife who revealed her mother's emotional neglect, being stonewalled by her husband when he was angry. These weren't cruel people. They were ordinary people whose shadows had been handed a map to their partner's most vulnerable places. Jung's recommendation wasn't to never be vulnerable. It was to be extraordinarily selective about who receives your deepest material, and to recognize that most people, even good ones, cannot be trusted with the full depth of your wounds because the shadow doesn't fight fair. The third thing you should never reveal is your income or financial reality. Jung recognized that money carries enormous psychological weight far beyond its material function. Money represents power, security, freedom, and status in the collective unconscious. When you reveal your financial situation, you fundamentally alter how people's unconscious positions you in their internal hierarchy. And this repositioning happens instantly and permanently, regardless of how the person consciously feels about money. If you reveal that you earn significantly more than someone, their shadow begins a process Jung called compensatory devaluation. They unconsciously find ways to diminish you in other areas to restore psychological equilibrium. Suddenly, your success is attributed to luck rather than effort. Your choices are questioned, your lifestyle is judged, not because they're bad people, but because the psyche cannot tolerate feeling inferior without compensating somewhere. If you reveal financial struggle, a different mechanism activates. People unconsciously lose respect for your judgment and competence, even in areas completely unrelated to money. Jung found that patients who disclose financial difficulty were subsequently treated as less capable in every domain, as though money troubles revealed some fundamental inadequacy. This isn't rational, it's archetypal. Money is so deeply embedded in the collective unconscious as a symbol of competence that its absence triggers automatic reassessment of someone's entire character. Jung advised treating your financial reality as private not because of shame, but because of psychology. Other people's unconscious responses to your money situation will distort every interaction you have with them afterward. The information cannot be unlearned, and the shadow's response to it cannot be controlled by the person experiencing it. Silence on this topic protects your relationships from distortions that neither you nor the other person can prevent. You're probably already running through the list, counting how many of these you've handed over without a second thought. That recognition is exactly where the True Self-Discovery Guide picks up. 24 reflection exercises rooted in Jung's work to help you rebuild the discernment between what to share, what to protect, and who's actually earned access. It's in the description. Now let's keep going, because the next 4 categories are the ones people get wrong most often. The fourth thing you should never reveal is your acts of generosity or kindness. Jung discovered something counterintuitive about how the psyche responds to someone announcing their own goodness. When you tell people about the kind things you've done, instead of admiring you, their unconscious becomes suspicious. Something in the human shadow distrusts performed virtue. The psyche instinctively asks, "Why do they need me to know this?" And that question poisons the act of kindness retroactively, transforming it from genuine generosity into something that feels transactional. Jung connected this to what he understood about the persona, the social mask we present to the world. When someone advertises their kindness, it reads to the unconscious as persona construction rather than authentic character. The listener's shadow begins looking for the hidden motive. They start questioning whether your generosity was about them or about your self-image, whether your help was genuine care or a strategy to create obligation. These doubts often aren't fair. You might have been purely generous, but by announcing it, you activated a suspicious mechanism in the other person's psyche that wouldn't have been triggered if you'd simply remained silent. Jung also found that revealed generosity creates unconscious resentment in the recipient. When someone knows you helped them, and you know they know, and everyone is aware of the dynamic, the person who received help feels subtly diminished. They're now positioned as someone who needed assistance, and you're positioned as the one capable of providing it. This power imbalance breeds quiet hostility over time. The people you've helped most visibly often become the people who turn on you most viciously. Not because they're ungrateful, because the shadow cannot tolerate feeling indebted. Jung observed that silent generosity built genuine connection, while announced generosity built resentment. The good you do speaks loudest when you let it speak for itself. The fifth thing you should never reveal is your inner spiritual or psychological experiences. Jung was particularly insistent about this one because he had watched it destroy people. When someone undergoes genuine psychological transformation, real shadow integration, authentic individuation, actual expansion of consciousness, they often feel compelled to share what's happening inside them. The experience is so profound, so reality-altering, that keeping it private feels impossible. But Jung found that sharing these experiences almost always damaged both the experience and the relationships. The reason is that genuine inner transformation is deeply threatening to people who haven't undergone it. When you describe what you're experiencing psychologically or spiritually, the listener's unconscious faces an uncomfortable choice. Either what you're describing is real, which means they're missing something profound about existence, or what you're describing is delusion, which means you're losing your mind. Almost everyone unconsciously chooses the second interpretation because it's less threatening to their worldview. So instead of receiving support during your most significant transformation, you receive concern, dismissal, or pathologizing. People suggest therapy. They worry about you. They subtly or overtly communicate that what you're experiencing isn't real. Jung watched this pattern repeatedly in his practice. Patients undergoing genuine individuation would share their experiences with family or friends, and immediately face resistance that made them doubt their own process. The transformation that was making them more whole was being treated as breakdown by people who couldn't recognize what was happening. Jung eventually told his patients to protect their inner work with fierce privacy. Not because it wasn't real, but because most people's unconscious cannot tolerate evidence of transformation they haven't chosen for themselves. Your inner journey is sacred precisely because it's yours. Sharing it with people who can't hold it doesn't create connection. It creates an audience for your most vulnerable process, and that audience will almost always misunderstand what they're witnessing. The sixth thing you should never reveal is your relationship problems. Jung found that when people share intimate relationship difficulties with friends, family, or colleagues, they trigger a cascade of unconscious responses that make the situation exponentially worse. The person you confide in doesn't receive the information neutrally. Their shadow processes it through their own relational wounds, their own projections, their own unresolved dynamics. What they offer back as advice is almost never about your situation. It's about theirs, filtered through yours. But there's a deeper problem Jung identified. When you reveal relationship struggles to someone outside the relationship, you create a psychological triangle. Now, a third person holds information about your partner that your partner doesn't know is being shared. This third party develops opinions, judgments, and positions based on hearing only your perspective during your most activated emotional states. And those opinions calcify. Long after you and your partner have resolved the conflict, the person you confided in still holds the worst version of your partner in their mind. They remember every terrible thing you said in pain. They've formed a fixed image based on your worst moments of description. Jung observed that this is how family members end up hating a partner they barely know, because they've received years of conflict reports without witnessing any of the resolution, tenderness, or growth. They hold a curated archive of the relationship's lowest points, and their view of your partner becomes irreversibly distorted. Then when they treat your partner with subtle hostility or judgment, new conflicts emerge that wouldn't have existed if you'd maintained privacy. Jung recognized that every relationship contains darkness. Sharing that darkness with outsiders doesn't illuminate it. It spreads it into spaces where it can't be resolved, and creates enemies for a partner who was never given the chance to be understood in full. The exception Jung acknowledged was seeking guidance from a trained professional whose role is specifically designed to hold difficult material without the unconscious distortions that personal relationships introduce. A therapist or analyst operates under a framework that ordinary friends and family simply don't have. They can receive your relationship's shadow without it poisoning their perception permanently. Everyone else, no matter how well-intentioned, will store what you share, and it will color everything that follows. The seventh thing you should never reveal is what you see in other people's psychology. This is the one that true empaths and psychologically aware individuals struggle with most. When you can perceive someone's patterns, their shadow material, their unconscious motivations, their wounds, there's a powerful urge to share what you see. You believe that showing someone their blind spot is helping them, that naming someone's pattern will help them break it, that pointing out unconscious behavior will bring it into consciousness. But Jung found that unsolicited psychological insight is received by the human psyche as one of the most threatening forms of intrusion possible. When you tell someone what you see operating beneath their surface, their defense system activates with extraordinary force. You haven't helped them see their shadow. You've become their shadow's primary enemy. The defense mechanisms that were keeping that material unconscious now redirect their full force against you. The person doesn't experience gratitude for your perception. They experience violation. You've walked into a room in their psyche that was locked for a reason and turned on the lights without permission. Whatever they were protecting themselves from seeing, you've forced into visibility before they were psychologically ready to face it. Jung documented that Even accurate psychological observations, when shared uninvited, destroyed relationships more reliably than almost any other behavior. The person on the receiving end felt exposed, humiliated, and unsafe. And their response was predictable. They attacked the messenger. They dismissed your perception as projection. They accused you of being judgmental, arrogant, or cruel. They cut you off entirely, not because you were wrong, often precisely because you were right, and that rightness was unbearable. The correct use of psychological perception, Jung insisted, was silent discernment. You see what you see. You use that information to make decisions about how much to trust someone, how close to allow them, how to navigate the relationship wisely. But you don't announce your observations. You don't try to be someone's uninvited therapist. You don't mistake your ability to see clearly for permission to expose what others are hiding from themselves. Your perception is a tool for your own navigation. The moment you turn it into a spotlight aimed at someone else's shadow, you've transformed a gift into a weapon, and the first person it wounds is usually you. Jung's framework across all 7 of these categories comes down to a single principle that modern culture gets dangerously wrong. Openness is not the same as wisdom. Sharing everything is not the same as being authentic. And vulnerability without discernment isn't courage. It's psychological carelessness that hands people access to parts of you they are not equipped to handle responsibly. Jung recognized that the human shadow is real and present in every single person, including the people who love you most. And the shadow doesn't respond to sensitive information with care. It responds with whatever serves its unconscious needs, whether that's competition, sabotage, weaponization, or dismissal. This doesn't mean you should live behind walls, trusting no one and revealing nothing. Jung wasn't advocating for isolation or emotional shutdown. What he was teaching was strategic depth. You choose deliberately what to share, with whom, and when. You earn trust slowly through observing someone's consistent behavior over time before granting them access to your inner world. You recognize that silence about certain things isn't dishonesty. It's the recognition that not everyone has earned the right to your full depth, and that protecting yourself isn't a failure of openness. It's the highest form of self-respect. The people who understand this principle move through the world differently. They're warm, but not overexposed, present, but not transparent, connected, but not compromised. They understand that real intimacy isn't about telling everyone everything. It's about carefully choosing the rare individuals who've demonstrated through years of consistent behavior that they can hold what you share without their shadow distorting it. Those people exist, but they're far rarer than the culture of radical openness wants you to believe. And until someone proves they belong in that category, your silence on these 7 things isn't hiding. It's wisdom that Jung spent a lifetime trying to teach. Protecting what's sacred about your inner life isn't weakness. It's the recognition that you carry things of genuine value, and genuine value deserves to be guarded with the same care you'd give anything precious. Your plans, your wounds, your resources, your goodness, your transformation, your intimate relationships, your perception of others. These are the building blocks of your psychological life. Hand them out carelessly, and you'll watch them be mishandled by people who never intended harm, but whose shadows couldn't help themselves. Guard them wisely, and you'll find that the life you build has an integrity to it that no amount of radical openness could ever create. That's what Jung understood. That's what changes everything about how you move through the world, from this day forward. Jung spent a lifetime teaching that wisdom isn't about building walls. It's about knowing what deserves to be guarded. The True Self-Discovery Guide takes that principle and makes it practical. 24 exercises to help you protect what's sacred while finally facing what you've been avoiding in yourself. It's in the description whenever you're ready to begin.